Welcome to Film Trace. This is a podcast where we trace the life of a film from conception to production, all the way to release and reception. Chris, you're going to have to introduce this film because it is starting with a lot of baggage that I want you to hold as we start this show.
I shall hold it the best I can. Y'all, I thought, for whatever reason, it might be a good idea to take a look at the Home Alone reboot for our kind of Christmas-themed episode.
Yeah.
This year, we did do Rare Exports: A Christmas Tale last year, which is one of my favorite Christmas movies. And that was a great talk. And I'm glad that I could turn you on to that movie. Dan, you were a fan, right?
I loved it. Yeah, it was a really good time.
But this one was a mistake. So,
well, I mean, maybe for you. I don't know about me yet.
What? Yeah, that's true. That's true. I should not assume. We are talking about Home Sweet Home Alone. The Dan Mazer directed, Mikey Day and Streeter Seidel written attempt at bringing back the franchise of our nostalgic youth in the 90s, of course, and then it kind of sputtered along to a non-Culkin sequel and even further straight-to-video nonsense. But it's also kind of our first, I think it is our first family-friendly film to cover on the show.
I think you're right. I think this is the first really, truly family film.
Yes, and also our first Disney Plus release.
Well, it's kind of it's a weird film because it's technically the first 20th Century Studios film to be produced for Disney Plus. So obviously Disney bought 21st Century Fox. When was this? A couple years ago. So they inherited the rights to Home Alone. And so they decided, hey, let's make a direct to streaming. Is this the sixth movie?
That is correct. Yes.
How are there? First of all, I haven't seen anyone since the second one. You have kids. I imagine maybe your kids have seen the other ones.
Yes, I have seen the third one a couple times, regrettably. I have seen bits and pieces of the fourth and fifth ones, but I have not really forced myself to sit down and watch one until this new one. So I will say, yes, I've got two sons, 6 and 9 years old. Yeah. The 6-year-old's favorite is Home Alone 3, which is actually amazing factoid for film nerds. Yeah. Home Alone 3 is Roger Ebert's favorite Home Alone film.
Wow.
And my 9-year-old's favorite one is whatever one's called Holiday Heist. I believe that's the fifth one.
What's going on over there, man? Do they like the first one?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And we that's a regular family fun one. Like, it is kind of weird. Like, some of the things that are kind of questionable 30 years later. Sure. We had to have a long conversation about what gangster movies were, right? Because that was not a reference point for them at all. Yeah. Because kids don't just flip through and see old movie channels, like they used to.
Yeah, it's like black and white. They're hard pass.
Yeah, exactly. And the second one, which is controversial, my personal favorite.
Because you're a huge Trumper, right?
That's right. Yeah, exactly. And actually, it's funny you say that because that's one of the reasons my 9-year-old does not like to watch it, because he does not like having to see that man's face.
Yeah. That monster. Not that we're political or anything on this show.
No. But Tim Curry is a delight in Home Alone 2.
Yeah. I mean, Home Alone 2 is, it's one of those sequels that kind of works.
Yeah. One of the few, especially children's sequels, which are even tougher, I think, tougher nut to crack than, more mature fare. But I do think that we need to dive in to, where we were coming from, because I'm coming from a dad's perspective, classic dad status. Yeah, I wanted to kind of I wanted to kill two birds with one stone, because my kids have been hyped for a new Home Alone movie for over a year. This entry in the franchise was filmed right before the pandemic began, like so many newer releases that we've covered on the program. But it was basically shelved and rolled out, like you said, right here on Disney Plus through the 20th Century Studios banner. And you, Dan, are coming at it from, I think, somebody that like enjoyed it as
dude,
right.
9.
What was walk me through your experience, A, finding out that I was choosing this movie for this episode, and B, having to actually follow through and watch it by your lonesome.
So here's the deal. When I saw it on the list, I thought it was like an indie film. I thought it was just some like A24 thing that played at Sundance and would, have some controversial topic to it, and I'd probably cry. But no, as you I think you mentioned, there's like, oh no, it's a new Home Alone movie. And I was like, what are you talking about? It's like Home Sweet Home Alone. I was like, oh, that's what it is. So I was not happy about that. And then, I haven't seen Home Alone in a long time. I loved it when it came out. I was like, about 8 years old when it came out in 1990. So it was a pivotal film of my youth. Like a lot of people our age, like it was just like a huge milestone seeing that movie. It was a massive film back then, a huge hit. And plays on the TV pretty much every Christmas season. But I think I watched it in the last year or so, and I was like, oh wow, this like really holds up well.
It does.
It's well written, very well paced, like all like those very like meat and potatoes parts of making a movie. It just like works so well. There's parts of it that it's sort of lag, whatever, but it's one of those films where people have a lot of nostalgia for and cherish, and deservedly so. It's not just something from the past that people like because it's old and they saw it when they were a kid. It really is a good film. So going into it, I was like, okay, there's no way it's going to live up to the original. It's not really possible. And I decided and made the mistake of reading some reviews, or not even reviews, sort of like essays, before I dove into this. And one of the first essays I read was this article in Paste magazine, which is sort of, what would you call Paste magazine? It's like an Americana indie magazine, something like that. They have like bluegrass in there too, so it's a little bit like that too. They mix it up a bit. They wrote an essay about this film, and they basically gutted the film the entire time, like eviscerated it. And at first I was like, yeah, let's take this film down a peg, right? Let's Disney, let's just rip it to shreds. How dare they? But then I started to watch the film, and what I was seeing on screen and what I was hearing from critics and stuff did not align at all. I was just like very confused as to sort of the vitriol of the negative reaction to this movie, because I don't really think it really elicits a lot, let alone like this like deep hatred. So that's something I think we want to discuss here a little bit, like how we'll probably get to that a little bit later, but that's where I was coming from. And as I watched it, I was sort of like coming through that prism of like extreme negativity. I don't even know if the Rotten Tomatoes score was like 17%, something terrible. But I was I wasn't like pleasantly surprised that it was good. I was like kind of surprised that it was fine. And the reaction was extremely negative. Like, I'm not even talking about like, oh, it's bad, why would you remake this? It's like people are like out for this movie's life. Which I find way more interesting than the film itself, to be honest. But before I get to that, let's talk about what's this thing about. I think that's one of the big sticking points, is one of the basic plot points. So let's start there.
Right. Your log line is arguably confusing, to say the least.
It's super confusing. I got on IMDb. Thanks, IMDb, you losers. Right. User-generated content's terrible.
But even like the actual like press release stuff is still just like, wait, what? Okay, see if you can follow us, guys. Max Mercer, a mischievous and resourceful young boy, has been left behind while his family is in Japan for the holidays. Okay, we're with you so far, right?
It sort of makes sense. Why Japan? I mean, okay, sure, whatever.
Yeah, I know, yeah. Next, here's where it gets tricky. So when a married couple attempting to retrieve a priceless heirloom sets their sights on the Mercer family's home, it's up to Max to protect it from the trespassers, and he will do whatever it takes to keep them out. Okay, so first of all, there's just like a straight up falsity in that sentence, right?
What's the false part of that?
Max doesn't have, spoiler alert, he does not have the heirloom, and he is not attempting to protect
irony?
it.
That's dramatic irony, isn't it?
Right. Yes. But we don't. No, is that situational irony? Because
we know. Oh wait,
we don't know,
because we don't know that he doesn't know.
Right. We see a bulge in the jacket.
Oh, because okay.
Which makes
the situational irony. That's not dramatic irony. We would have to know that he didn't have it.
Right. Which, yeah. Whatever. Last piece of it. The reboot promises hilarious hijinks of epic proportions, and despite the absolute chaos, Max eventually comes to realize that there really is no place like home sweet home. Again, does he?
Yeah, that doesn't really happen.
No. Like you said, one of the aspects of the original film that is really like meat and potatoes, like you said, is like all the like puzzle pieces narratively fit together seamlessly.
Yeah,
like
really well.
It sets up a really simple, but like they do it in such a way that it's still just like ultimately cathartic and satisfying. Yes, Kevin understands the importance of family, and it somehow comes across as wholesome rather than corny. Maybe a little bit of corniness, but like, you know, it's a kid's film. It's a Chris Columbus picture.
Written by John Hughes.
But I'm with you on the vitriol. I'm not trying to go there, Dan, but I'm so confused about this.
Well, I think you have to start. It's problematic from the start. I think like if you dive into the conception of this, like you're thinking about Dan Mazer, the director. You think about Mikey Day, and is it Seidel? Yeah, who are both SNL people, right? And so there's this weird sort of the big decision as to why would you make. So the protagonist is Max, but so the protagonist is the parents.
Yeah, but not Max's parents.
But not Max's parents. So okay, wait a second. So that's already a switch, right? So the protagonist is now the people, the home invaders, right?
Right.
What were they called? The wet bandits in the original? Is that right?
Right, and then sticky bandits.
Yeah. So it's sort of reversing that, and that's kind of the whole conception that they wanted to play with. Essentially, it was like, hey, what if we decided to make this movie from their perspective? The immediate problem that pops into my head, and this would happen if we had a pitch meeting and they were 30 seconds in, I would be like, you can't do that because they're the antagonist. You can't make the antagonist the protagonist. I mean, like, you could in like a postmodern way, but you'd have to make a very, very dark adult film.
Right.
Because if you think about like the wet bandits and what they do in their free time, there's like some, just really illicit things happening, and they're not good people. But they're trying to make this switcheroo in a children's film. I mean, what do you make of that decision?
I mean, my own sons were immediately confused also. Before the first act even wraps up, they're like, so wait, like Jeff and Pam are the parents in question of a different family.
Yeah, totally different family.
The ones that think that young Max, played by Archie Yates from Jojo Rabbit, they believe he has their heirloom. They believe that this kid stole it from them during a open house.
Yeah.
And like the only reason my kids know what an open house is because we moved recently.
Yeah.
But then like already there's this question of not only, as you said, who are we identifying with?
Yeah.
Because like, especially for a children's film, you want to gravitate towards the child.
Yeah, always.
Right? Especially rather than the two.
Because you can't, I would argue that it's not a children's film.
Yeah, right?
Unless the child is the protagonist, it's not a children's film. So what is this?
It's in this gray area. And the other thing that made it kind of just like feel like something, it would like kind of felt intangible, like there's not really anything to latch onto, is because Jeff and Pam, played by Rob Delaney and Ellie Kemper, who do, I would say, an admirable job trying to bring these characters to life.
They swing away.
They're capable, they're competent. But they seem to like not really have much like evidence or reason or really even like motivation beyond just this kind of generic shroud of maybe we have to move. There's there is a telling interview with Rob Delaney where there was like also some Screen Rant did it during it was an on-set visit, and there was seemingly already confusion on set. The interviewer talked about how like the production designer and the actors were having a conversation about, who was middle class versus upper middle class versus lower. Like there's so much questions of class, like who is actually like down in the dumps, if anybody, in this film. Right?
It's like upstairs. I mean, it's not like EastEnders or something. Like it's not.
No. Like everybody's doing fine, right?
Yeah, like the protagonist couple. I'm just gonna call them Ellie and Rob because that's how I know them. Sure. They're not that. They're fine, right? They're not like.
Right.
Here's the thing about this. So, like the impetus, the main action of this movie is that they want to protect their own children's childhood home, but more like their childhood they're trying to protect, which I get, but is a very nebulous motive
because it's already splitting time with Max's character, right?
Yeah,
and so you're both dividing the screen time, and like they know. I mean, Disney and 20th century is not trying to like make a 3-hour epic. Right, so like
things like Traffic for children.
Yeah, deep dive ensemble picture. So it just feels. I mean, I think that's the thing, and yeah, should it inspire vitriol? I don't think so, but it definitely just feels limp.
I think some of the vitriol is because people are confused about the basic motives. Yeah. Because like there's a lot of people, and I saw this over and over again, where like the movie is kind of cruel. There's like it just has like a bad mood. Like everybody treats each other poorly, and I'm like, yeah, but I think you're missing the point that like these two protagonists, the main characters, want to save their house by selling this deformed doll. Which even there, you're just like, how would that get through anybody? Any executive reads this and like, how do you know, ridiculous.
And they already see an exact version of this deformed doll that they have up on eBay. So like, if that doll's already on eBay, putting a second one up there isn't going to get them a buyer. I don't know. Whatever.
It's very loose.
It's not. We didn't do a lot of thinking through.
Which is I kind of think that. Because you think about the guys who wrote it, like Mikey Day and Shooter Seidel, who were, are they still technically writers at SNL? Mikey Day like performs constantly.
Yeah, he was recently promoted to repertory, so I don't know if he writes
anymore. They wrote some great skits together. They wrote like that Close Encounters one with Kate McKinnon. What else did they write? Something other amazing. Oh, they David S. Pumpkins. They wrote that together. So they're a writing team. They've been writing together for a long time. But I'm thinking about it now, and it does kind of have like a weird SNL skit thing to it. Like it's just sort of like a very kind of one-off, kind of dumb premise
written on a deadline.
Even on a deadline, yeah. But like, and like never. It's mind blowing that nobody within an organization like Disney or 20th Century Fox like. There was no ghostwriter involved or executive writer that was sort of like, hey guys, this is not a real motive. Like this is not a real action that's taking place. Like, what are you doing? And then the other thing too, I mean, not to pile on this part of it, but I mean, this is in every review that talks about this and everybody that talks about it. It's like a big contentious point in the film. We don't learn anything that much about Max. Right, like he's like this sort of like, is he the antagonist here? Because he kind of seems like he is, but he's not because he's just protecting his own house,
and he doesn't actually
like,
He didn't actually steal anything.
No, he didn't do anything wrong. He's kind of a jerk, but he's a little kid and he's British. I kind of expect that, But I don't know. I mean, it's one of those things where it's like, yeah, if you can. Here's the thing, I got over that pretty quickly. Because I don't take this movie seriously. It's not a serious film.
Yeah.
And so you get over it. You're like, whatever. And then it kind of, it becomes a fun film-ish. What do you think about the humor? A lot of people attacked the humor in this movie.
Yeah. I didn't really have as much a problem with that. Like I enjoyed the, more grown-up friendly cameos from people like Jim Rash and Kenan Thompson.
Yeah.
So like, and like I said, even the leads, they're absolutely, seemingly assured in their role. Like they're not taking it seriously, but also they're giving it their all. And like if you took it as an assemblage of scenes, like I do think there's some both tried and true spirit that complements the franchise, and also some like unique, fresh twists on the genre. It's just too bad that it was kind of just put in a blender, because I do think that hinging on a couple different points: one, Max not being as much of a character, and two, the adult characters getting so much of point of view. I don't know how much our family with two small children even is going to go back and revisit this. Like,
yeah, I mean, it feels like a streaming movie. Streaming. What's the term we want to use these days? Streaming first.
Yeah,
I don't really know what we want to call it. There is, and I think we go back to the writing. Like, there's just a lack of polish to this thing.
Yes.
And people brought up like the lighting. I remember that I wrote some notes when I was watching it. I was like, the lighting in this interior, I'm not an expert in lighting. I don't know anything about lighting, but I can tell when it's bad.
Yes.
Right. Like the interior lighting in one of the first scenes, I was like, this is terrible. Like it just looks off. It looks rushed. So I do wonder, I don't, did you find any budget information? I couldn't find anything on a budget.
There's nothing. And, it definitely seems like one of those things that, for Disney, at least, maybe it was a blessing in disguise to, have to put this on the shelf for a while due to COVID, because I think I felt like this was going to be something that was going to be hyped and like front and center. I don't know about you, but when I opened my Disney Plus, I had to like do a search for it on its like the first day it was released. Like it's not being promoted. It's arguably even really kind of being just buried, which makes it feel like more of a in the line of the straight to video sequels of the franchise. Like how much are we really trying to reboot this, or is this just content wars personified?
Yeah. I feel like it's a little bit of both. Like it doesn't happen unless it has the Home Alone name attached to it, right? It's not just like you could come up with a concept like this and they're going to be like, whatever.
Right.
Although I wouldn't put it past them, though, to be honest with you. Like I was watching another holiday movie. This is on Netflix, a holiday one called Love Hard. And again, it's one of those kind of throwaway streaming movies. I enjoyed it. It was fun, but I would give it, if I was rating it at cinema, maybe like a 30 out of 100. It's not a good movie, but like it's an enjoyable kind of comfort watch. That's kind of what I thought this was too. And I thought it was a comfort watch, because if you remove the nostalgia for Home Alone almost completely, and you just kind of enjoy it, kind of view it on its own terms, I think it's a lot more enjoyable. So in that sense, I think it's just basically they're shoveling content down our throats.
Yeah.
They want eyeballs. Disney too, you think about it, like they just had a really bad kind of financial report that they're not growing as quickly as they wanted to on subscribers from Disney Plus. So yeah, I think this is only going to intensify, and that they just need, essentially, Netflix, Disney Plus, all of these streaming services are all about acquiring customers and reducing churn. So they think that the way to do that is by just like giving people a ton of content, which I don't think is probably the right thing to do. But yeah, I think the Home Sweet Home Alone feels like, hey, let's give these people. Here's the thing, though. You think about it, it's like Mikey Day, Seidel, Mazers, I think, is the real wild card here, because if we look at his sort of history, Sacha Baron Cohen, he's basically his writing partner, right? Ali G, Barack, Bruno, he wrote all those films. A new Barack movie came out in 2020, which I thought was pretty good.
I loved it. Yeah,
that was fine. What did he direct? He directed
Dirty Grandpa.
Which is, I mean, have you seen that?
No, I would never.
If you paid me $20, I would not see it. It looks unwatchable. He also wrote Office Christmas Party, which I literally just finished my second rewatch of. I've watched it when it came out. I just watched it tonight too, which is bizarre because I didn't know that he wrote that. to me, that looking at this, if you put it down on paper and said, hey, we got these writers, we got this cast, to be like, oh, let's do this now. Right. But then you get the if I saw the director, I'd be like, I don't know. Just because like he doesn't have a great track record. Obviously, he's not super experienced in the directing. But like as a writer, yeah, he's super solid, I would say. Well, I wouldn't say super solid, pretty solid.
But
when he's working with Cohen.
Right. So like that, how much of it is that kind of synergy between him and the writing partner? Cohen has like proved himself as a solo writer, but this guy just hasn't yet, right?
Yeah.
But
so
also, Dirty Grandpa made over $100 million.
What's wrong? What's wrong
on an $11 million budget? So like, I don't know. I think it's not a sure bet. But it does seem like one of those things by just looking at the names and history of people involved, both in front of and behind the camera. You'd think that this would be a no-brainer. And for me, it was when I, saw the news on Deadline way back when. It seemed like, okay, they were like actually going to revive this. They're not just going to like have it keep sputtering along. And like, I will actually have a reason. Kind of like I felt like I had a reason. Maybe it seems silly to equate these, but like to go and see The Force Awakens with my sons.
Yeah.
But it seems like maybe that was in the plans at some point early on in negotiations, pre-production. But then, I mean, tell me what you think, at some point, whether it was before or during the pandemic, they just kind of realized that they had a stinker and just needed to get it to the finish line.
That just seems that's probably the case, right? Yeah. They like the concept, they liked everything's sort of aligned to really give it, I don't know, probably like $20 million budget, somewhere in that 20 to 30.
That's a fair guess, I think. Yeah.
It's definitely not micro budget. Yeah, and I think that ultimately, this is funny because we were just watching this Netflix movie, Love Hard, and me and my good friend Pippa were talking about it. We're like, there's this sort of style to Netflix, streaming first films, where they're missing all of these elements that you would get, say, from like a Sony movie or a Warner Brothers film that plays in the big theater. And I think like they approach this film as a streaming first film.
Yeah. And
it just, throughout the entire thing, it just feels shoddy. And it's not just the writing, it's a lot of the production stuff. Ultimately, I don't even know if they thought it was a stinker. I think they got exactly what they wanted, which is a sort of like, hey, it's middle of the road. We don't really care if people like it or not. It's about eyeballs, right? Like, as long as, I don't know, 20 million people watch it, we think like it's paid for itself. It's just a very different business model than you have from a theatrical film. Not to say it's better or worse. Like, streaming films can be fantastic. But, there's, and I think too, I'll go to like, have you seen Red Notice yet on Netflix?
No, I don't have much of any interest.
Another streaming first film, sure. But a massive budget, $200 million, maybe 250, I hear. You have The Rock, who else is there?
Ryan Reynolds.
Yeah. And Wonder Woman, what's her name? Gal Gadot. Gadot, yeah. And you have a very similar reaction. So I watched that movie. I was down in Florida visiting my uncle. We watched it together. He's not a big movie guy. But he didn't fall asleep, which is a huge sign of approval. To the film, he's like, it was bad, but it held your attention, which is the entire point, right? But with that movie too, there's what's interesting about that film is that it felt like a theatrical film. Like, you could have put that on the big screen, and it was on the big screen for like a week or something. I forget. I think Cinemark did a partnership with Netflix to do it, and it felt like a big theatrical movie. Even when you watched it on Netflix, this one did not have that at all. Right. And I think where people really get pissed off about it is when you go back to Home Alone and you think about that feels like a theatrical film. And it's like these little tiny details, not just the writing, but the production design, the editing, the mute. You know, one of the things too, like it just felt like, do you kind of see that streaming house style that they do?
Totally.
Yeah. What is it? Like, what is it? Do you think someone did a really lengthy explanation of this on Reddit? And I forget where it was, but it was a really fascinating one about how they light it specifically. It's so different.
Yeah, it really feels. I mean, I don't know. There's like a distinct feeling of like almost, yeah, like halfway between a TV show and like a variety special. Like it doesn't. It feels like it's stuck in this netherworld, as if to say, like, this is a special thing that you should not call a movie or a TV show.
Yeah.
It's
like No Man's Land.
Yeah, and I think there's the high end version of that too with Disney Plus. Like, I think there is a weird No Man's Land that's happening with like the MCU shows and Mandalorian.
I totally disagree. I'm
really
agree with you. So I just watched WandaVision and Loki. And Loki specifically, Loki to me has, okay, the writing's not great. I'll give you that. But the production design on Loki is next level. I think it's better than any movie I've seen in like the last 5 years.
Really?
Like, it's just gorgeous and like in depth. There's like a richness to like the imagination going into the world that they're building. Whereas here, I mean, it's a little bit hard because, you know, this is like real world versus sort of a made up world. Whereas here, it just feels like they're not even trying, or like they don't know who to work with to do that. I don't know. What do you I mean, what is it? What is it to you?
I'm guess what I'm saying is like, and this is, you know, maybe a symptom of a larger kind of evolution, or in some people's minds, a de-evolution of like cinematic aesthetic in general, right? Where it's like I agree, like they're doing things with the MCU shows that are next level in many like creative ways, but ultimately, and this has been kind of the, you know, MCU backlash overall with the movies as well, where it's like so like blandly colored, right?
Yeah.
This has been leveled right at like Eternals most recently.
Oof,
and Shang-Chi, where it's like you have such a heavily artificial world and then like flattened with like shadow and you know, synthetic backdrops. Like, I mean, I think it was you that told me that like they literally film Loki in an abandoned mall, right?
Yeah, right by it. Yeah.
Like the human actors are the only actual element to it.
Yeah.
And so for me, the connection is like Home Sweet Home Alone, and, you know, a lot of the other direct that kind of dates back all the way back to the Disney Channel, right?
Sure, yeah. 100%.
Where it's like it's very clear, like I'm trying to think of maybe a nostalgic reference point that would work for both of us. I don't know if did you have the Disney Channel growing up?
I did have the Disney Channel.
Okay, so like you remember like the 90s version of Mickey Mouse Club?
Absolutely.
Or like even on like Nickelodeon, you can't do that on television.
Yeah.
Like that kind of style where it's like it's so obviously a set, right?
Yeah.
And it feels not just artificial in the sense of like,
not like artistically a set like dog.
No. Yeah, this is not a stage production. but it's very much like let's throw it together and then light it so that people don't realize that we've switched from an exterior to a soundstage.
Yeah, the bigger question there to me is that like the money hasn't changed. Right? Like,
yeah,
there's no way they shot this for less than $20 million. Like, I couldn't believe it if they did. Like, because of the people involved and all that kind of stuff. And it's Disney and it's Home Alone. It's almost like they're getting way less bang for their buck. I mean, part of the whole content wars thing is that like it's a seller's market. So if you're a director, if you're in tech, if you're like, they want you constantly. And like, you know, a $20 million movie now isn't what a $20 million was 5 years ago. Not just because of inflation either. because there's just, there's a insane demand to create stuff. And there's diminishing returns. I think this movie could have worked in a lot of different ways, but it does to me. And like some people would say, oh, it's just psychological, right? Like you're just watching it on a TV. You're not watching a big movie. Movie theater. If you're watching the movie theater, it would feel totally different. Well, I can give you the exact example of this would be Dune. Like I watched Dune in the movie theater. It was mind blowing. And I watched it again with my uncle in like maybe a 50-inch TV that like was insanely loud and had terrible sound. And it was still breathtaking. So I just don't buy that it's like some sort of psychological thing that we're watching it on a smaller screen that's like changing our perspective that much. Right. Like what's on the screen, it matters, I think, a lot more than the screen that you're watching it on.
Yeah, it would have been interesting.
Says.
right. It would have been interesting to see like if Dirty Grandpa was like 2016?
2016, yeah.
Right? And so we weren't quite at the place where we would have things like Red Notice, right? Like streaming first movies that had A-list stars. Zac Efron and Robert De Niro are in Dirty Grandpa, right? Yeah. But still like the affect and like the just like legit trash level quality of that kind of production could have easily fit at home on a small screen and still gotten plenty of eyeballs just for the sheer fact that it's like Robert De Niro doing gross stuff and Zac Efron reacting to it, right?
Yeah.
There's no cinematic quality there.
No, because it's like a joke delivery system.
Yeah.
It's like it's there to get you to sort of think about, like when I just watched Office Christmas Party, I laughed a ton because I don't need to see it in a theater. There's no cinematic elements, like you said, to it whatsoever. It's just sort of like joke, comedic situation. It's no different than watching SNL. I think where maybe we can like start talk about like the reaction to this movie, which has been super negative. I think the problem here is that like, and one of the reasons why there's such this friction between reviewers and people who watched it and their expectations and what they wanted out of it is that difference. Because when you watch Home Alone, it does feel big, despite it being a pretty small story.
Yeah.
And it feels, there's just something about a movie production, let's say pre-2015. And it's still the case for movies that come out now that are bigger, but like without a doubt, if you saw a movie in the theater pre-2015 or even let's say pre-2010, it has a certain level of weight to it. And I don't think that is made up. Like, I think it's actually like production techniques and writing and the actual technical craft of making a film. It was just better, or it was more professional, or it was deeper on some level than this film. And I think like that's what's causing the rift. It isn't that this film is like that bad. It's that it's this style of film trying to compare it to something like Home Alone, which is almost like a different medium at this point. I mean, like, look at like what's the Rotten Tomato score in this thing? I mean, it's ridiculous.
It's horrendous. Yeah. So we look at all critics 18%, audience 13%, compared to it is somehow better on Letterboxd with a 30.
Well, but Letterboxd is kind of skewed a little bit. Like that, I think 30 is actually the lowest score I've ever seen.
Oh, okay. Because like
it's almost like it's like Pitchfork where everything's a 7.
Yeah, gotcha. IMDb 35, Metacritic audience 32, Metacritic critics 35. Like we're right down there with the lowest of the low. Google rating is a little higher with 43%.
That's super bad. Like
that's it's still like to not at least crack a 50 with just like a generic Google rating from like literally the simplest collection of people that click on stars and stuff on their web browser is pretty rough. You're angering a lot of people if you're managing to get that kind of reaction. And I mean, to kind of just like tie that into one of the main points about like cinematic quality. Maybe one thing that we're missing in this conversation is like comparing it to other specifically like children's oriented family films,
Yeah.
right? The first thing that comes to my mind as we get into this discussion of like when is it necessary to like actually like put some elbow grease into a production so that it can actually have some legs
Yeah.
legacy wise, but also like at least get onto the screen and feel like it belongs up on the big screen. I mean, the Tom and Jerry movie from earlier this year. Looking at it in comparison, you have once again just like the worst possible scores, but still at least a distinct division between what the critics said, which was horrible, 31% on the tomato meter and 22% on Metacritic. Still better than Home Alone or Home Sweet Home Alone. But the audience score, 82% for Tom and Jerry. So
yeah,
like,
it's like, well, that was a really surprisingly did well at the box office.
right. And so and that was one of the, same day HBO Max releases.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So like, but also I watched that with my kids, completely disposable.
Yeah.
I laughed less as a parent. And like, are there children going on Rotten Tomatoes now? Like, what is the distinction you think between something like that, which once again, beloved IP brought back, but
yeah, beloved, but I feel like Tom and Jerry, I'm not like a Tom and Jerry expert by any stretch of imagination.
scholar.
I feel like it's more pervasive and expansive of an IP. Whereas like this is like very specific. And like I feel like, okay, so the last two Home Alone movies, I didn't even know they existed.
Yeah.
I feel like people just let's talk about like who is rating this on Rotten Tomatoes, right? It's people over 25 years old, probably. Right? There's nobody
so
under 25 is going on Rotten. Like, do like Zoomers go on Rotten Tomatoes and care? I don't think they care that Rotten Tomatoes even exists. They don't seem like the type of people that are going to like dive into the critical reception of a movie,
right?
Not to be insulting or anything. They're gone. So yeah, it's older people I think that are rating it so harshly. And I think when I read some of these essays and watched some YouTube videos, there's like multiple YouTube videos. Like just look up Home Sweet Home Alone on YouTube, which I'm constantly on YouTube, so this is all I do in my life. There's like video essays about how terrible this movie is. And I think this brings up a much larger point about like criticism, film criticism in general on YouTube, which is very popular and very prevalent. How they view movies like this and how it changes public opinion, or does it, and especially on social media platforms. And how do we get to a 13% for a movie like this? Because like, there's no way this is a 13%. Right. It just doesn't make any sense. Like I would put it at like maybe a 40 or 50. Like it's not a good movie. But it's not some like war crime. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like I feel like there's this weird feedback loop where if like a few people like put up stuff, it's kind of the whole one of the problems with social media in general. All it takes is a few people to really speak loudly, especially with hatred, and then it just like it's a feedback loop. So it's like I don't think you could see this movie without already hating it first based on the social media like deluge that comes at you about it. And I think people view it through that lens. And so like that's why people hate this movie so much, is because they were essentially told to hate it by the group. I don't know. That's just the theory I'm throwing out there. I don't know. What do you think about that?
I think that's fair. I think that I think that even happens within critic circles too, right?
100%. Yeah.
So like if it would happen in that microcosm, why would it not happen with the less educated and more just like looking for instant gratification crowd that is, actually paying for the subscriptions to these streaming services, right?
Yeah.
Speaking of the critics, it was across the board just really bad, but there are a couple voices that leapt out from the crowd. Benjamin Lee of The Guardian said that it was a surprisingly entertaining, if wholly unnecessary, sequel. A tangerine where we expected to find a lump of coal.
That's a little too sugary for me.
Yeah, he just liked it because there was a Brit as in
Yeah,
the
exactly.
center.
Yeah, it's a British film technically. I mean, when you look at it, like it's so.
Yeah, filmed in Montreal, but yeah, it's and Rob Delaney lives in Britain and
Lives in Britain, yeah, and then what's her name, Aisling B, the mother of Max, who's Irish. She got in trouble. Did you see that?
No, what happened?
So she's Irish and she spoke in a British accent, and like some like Irish paper got all over about it because they're like, apparently like the IRA is researching. I don't know what's going on over there.
Oh my gosh, take care of her, IRA. No, I didn't say that.
Jake Wilson.
Jake Wilson of The Age in Australia, to keep going with the British countries, or formerly British countries. This is less an actual movie than a lazy approximation, half-heartedly monkeying with formula while showing no understanding of why that formula ever worked at all.
I thought that was kind of a softer one.
Yeah, but I think that's one of the more reasonable takedowns, because it's just it's hard to. I would be hard pressed to even like sit Mikey Day down and be like, "Can you have a rebuttal to the statement?" And he'd be like, "No, man, just did it for the money." Right?
Yeah, because SNL doesn't pay me anything, probably.
Exactly, right. And it probably took him a week to put together with his friend. Yeah. Courtney Howard of Variety is one of the more straight ahead, just absolutely hate it kind of critic. Mean-spirited, downright sloppy, and awkwardly unfunny. This rote feature reboot lacks holiday cheer. I don't know. Yeah.
So I don't. Keep in mind, Variety and Hollywood Reporter usually get the reviews up first, right? Because they're the industry papers. So they have an influence without a doubt on how people see a movie.
Right. So that's definitely one of those domino effect pieces, just set in place, locked and loaded. The Letterboxd reviews were even meaner.
It was so good. So good.
Tell us some of these, Dan.
How do I unwatch this? Look, I'm no expert, but I'm pretty sure this film single-handedly caused climate change. This movie is objectively incorrect. This is one of my favorite. I hope every person responsible for this chokes on gingerbread cookies.
God.
This is a lengthy one, but I want to get this out because this is like a good sort of representation of what people actually think. One of the most poorly made films I've seen all year, with proper composition, framing, and lighting, having left the building, which we've talked about. Disney's Home Sweet Home is a remake sequel hybrid that seems to pride itself on being the cheapest, dullest, laziest excuse for a comedy could possibly be, wasting its fantastic cast on dreadful material and spitting in the face of the original classic, and by extension passing water over the grave of John Hughes in the process. But that, I think it goes back to what I mentioned at the beginning. Like there's some hatred in these reviews, and I don't get where that's coming from. I honestly don't understand why people are so pissed about it.
Yeah, I mean, is it? I cannot imagine even John Hughes, somebody that you definitely is an argument to be made that he had some kind of artistic integrity, but was essentially a populist, right?
100%.
And
he played the crowd.
Right. He knew how the industry worked. He knew what was going to. He was a hit maker for a reason, right?
Yeah.
So, would he be disappointed? Maybe. Would he have understood how this came about? Absolutely. Right. It's cheap, dull, lazy. Absolutely. But once again, with what you're working with, especially, I am curious to, play the what if game and think, okay, let's say they did, manage to finish filming, and the pandemic didn't happen. Could they have seen that there was no way to get this figured out in the edit and gone back and refilmed some stuff, reworked some plot points, and actually put it together for a proper Christmas theatrical release?
I think so. I think once you get theatrical involved, you're talking at a minimum, and okay, pandemic's changed a bit, but domestically $50-60 million to market it alone. So if you're spending that type of cash to market, you better believe the final product on the screen has to be something. That's where you get more cooks in the kitchen. And we always say that that's a bad thing. Oh, you don't want the execs to get involved, but executive producers exist for a reason.
Yeah.
Right? They are the people that kind of understand how this stuff works on a holistic level. And they would see this and probably be like, absolutely not. Like, this does not work at all. Like, they look at the dailies every day and be like, what is going on here?
Yeah.
But I think, like, I don't know, they must have gotten in, like you mentioned, like they must have gotten in the can and said, whatever. It's Disney Plus. It's not real. Like, these aren't real shows. Like, this is all made up BS. Like, you'll eat whatever we shoveled down your throat because you're paying $13 a month.
Well, and to make another comparison, this came up in conversation with our friends recently, is Cruella, right? Where it's a live action family film, but they really wanted to make sure that it was polished so that it would get that proper theatrical release even during
theatrical.
COVID. Right.
That movie pops. Like, it's not fantastic. I enjoyed it, but like that movie pops.
I haven't watched it yet, but like, do you think there's a similar like inverse version of that happening where if it had right, I could easily see like a crappy hastily put together origin story for Cruella de Vil just like existing on Disney Plus rather than being like one of the most talked about family films of the year.
Yeah, I mean that's a good point. I mean, like, to be honest with you, the difference between those two is like night and day. Mm-hmm. Like, it's like I mean, Cruella costs a lot of money, but like it is a big movie. It's a big theatrical movie, and this is a Disney TV film.
Yeah,
that's all it is, and that's like, you can take it or leave it, but there's like no reason to like start a civil war over it. That's why people are like. They're like so adamant about it. But it is interesting. It kind of reminds me of a little bit of one, something that we did over the summer, kind of a special thing we did. We did Fear Street, which was 3 movies. And those were shot to be released theatrically. But pandemic happens, same thing. Fox owned it, and essentially Disney took over, and then Netflix is basically like, we're going to buy this from you because Disney doesn't want to put it out. Yeah. So Netflix buys it, puts it out. Everybody watched that on streaming, but that felt it didn't feel like pure cinema, but it felt like big enough where you're like, yeah, this is interesting. This has some heft to it. And a little bit of a TV teen show to it, right?
But that added to like the campiness of it almost.
It really worked.
It hit that threshold.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a threshold, and I think Home Sweet Home Alone just doesn't really meet it at all. No. And you think, and I think people expected a big movie. They expected Home Alone 6 or a reboot of Home Alone, and they got, it's like that Simpsons episode where they buy Sony instead of Sony.
That's nice. Yeah.
It's just one of those things.
And we should mention that, I think one of the things people were wanting, and maybe this plays into it somewhat, is like, Macaulay Culkin has started having a higher profile. His brother's got a huge profile now, who was also in the original film. And then what do we end up with for Home Sweet Home Alone? No Culkins, but at least we get the guy who played Buzz. And that's just like, I think, a pretty good indicator of, where the movie's at.
It's not even second run. Now, here's a question for you. Is this low? Like, for you young folks, you don't know what we're talking about, but straight to DVD was a term that was used for films that skipped theatrical and went to DVD, released on DVD. They usually had very poor quality. Would you put this? And I would say TV movies are lower than that, actually.
Yes.
On some level. Where would you put this?
Well, I mean, I think it depends on...
It depends.
Yeah. Because at least TV movies can be nominated for Emmys.
Yeah. Jeez, brutal.
Yeah, I think it's of the bits and pieces I've seen of the 2 Home Alone films that were straight to DVD, it's at least a cut above that. But not by much, but definitely like, at least there was the Disney machine behind it rather than like somebody looking for a tax write-off.
And you have that great special effect when he gets hit in the head with a pool ball. Right? You can't get that in a straight DVD.
No.
Money. Oh man, do you want people to see this? I would say, here's what I'd say: if you're a Home Alone fan and you kind of are interested, just check it out.
You can always turn it off.
Yeah, exactly. If you like it, I think it's more important if you like the cast, you'll enjoy it, because I thought it was pretty funny, a lot of the spots, and like, there's some funny people in here. But no, it's not a good movie.
There's a pretty good set piece with the frozen driveway. I think that was pretty
fun.
well done. Yeah,
that was really fun.
What do we got coming up next week, Dan?
We have our good friends and we'll call him industry insider, Ryan, who's going to come and talk about, I would say, a pivotal dystopian film. That's what I put in the copy here. I think that's probably right. Children of Men from 2006. If you haven't seen it, please watch it. It was one of the, I think biggest films of my young adulthood. A big sort of I guess you'd call it anti-war film, Iraq War 2. But check it out. It's on Tubi and it is its 15th anniversary. So we'll be talking about that next week on Film Trace.